Journal entry 16 November 2020, 11:05 p.m. A big tree has fallen. The end of an era. Ghana mourns. I feel unwell and just so sad every time I hear any of these. You have joked about dying so many times, I have lost count. But this time it's true, and the joke is on me. In this episode, we're talking about loss, the different kinds of loss, and the ways in which we can empower ourselves to better navigate loss. Now, when I think about the extract that I just read, it literally takes me right back to 2020. I think in 2020, everybody was literally living at the edge of their seat. It looked like the world was turning upside down and nobody knew what tomorrow held. I particularly was kind of traumatized every day in the last, months because I was also pregnant and there were all these wild theories every day, something else in the news. And there was just a scary time of not knowing what was going to happen, if your loved ones were going to be safe, and not even being able to have obviously the freedom of movement and life as we used to was uncomfortable for all of us. Um, but I think the most devastating change that 2020 brought to our lives was the nearness and reality of death. I think it made death become something that was possible for anybody, because we tend to have a rather unrealistic and unhealthy relationship with the way we think about death. It's always that thing that happens to somebody else and never you. But I think that period where there's a global pandemic that, is moving in ways that we cannot understand, is touching any and everybody with nobody being excluded, it really just put things into perspective that it could be you, it could be anybody. And even though all that unconscious, you know, orientation was happening, I don't think we could have ever been equipped for the deaths that actually did happen. And I experienced the loss of a friend and somebody that I really held in high esteem because of the level of impact of the years in which I knew him. That loss also came with, a whole lot of change and processing of death and the role that it plays, in our lives. When you lose somebody that has meaning in your life, when you lose somebody that you have, a connection with, when you lose somebody that has an impact in who you are, it's difficult. And sometimes we have so many questions. How did they go? Did they have peace? Where are they? Most importantly, what's life on the other side like? How do you move on? Do they feel the, ways? Do they see us? Do we see them again? All these questions that nobody has answers to. And it's crazy to me that as far as life science and, just even psychology, religion, faith, all of these things evolve, we still do not have a full grasp of what life after life as we know it holds. And this just brings me into this interesting conversation on loss, the different kinds of loss that, we can go through. Um, I, I don't generally think of myself as somebody who has gone through a lot of loss. But when I sat down to try and script this episode, I realized that actually I have gone through quite some loss. And even that in itself is motivating to me in the sense that I've gone through things have happened to me. I've experienced things, but I'm still moving. I'm still very positive. I'm still very happy with my life and my experiences. And it kind of encourages me and shows me that regardless of the things that have happened, there's still that need to have, the positive outlook and most importantly, the gratitude for the fact that you are still here and have the blessing of being able to live life and live a good life. I want to kind of race back to my first memory of loss when I was 6. My mother's younger sister was pregnant with her second child. She lived in our house with us, and it was such an exciting time for my family. I constantly, was with her. I spent a lot of time with her. She was a designer, so she would make things for the baby all day, the shopping. Like, our whole lives were all about this, incredible little girl she was going to go to the hospital one day and come back with. And I was so expectant for that baby and for my auntie and the happiness of our whole family. And that entire life, that I had pictured just went crumbling one day when my dad came at a very odd time where my dad doesn't show up, and called all of us, my sisters, my cousins, all together and said, um, basically, like, he knows that we're waiting for my auntie to come home with the baby, but God had called her to heaven. So the baby was coming home, and he wanted all of us to do everything that we can to make the baby comfortable and make my auntie smile wherever she is. And as a 6-year-old receiving this news, I mean, I knew that it meant dread in some way, but I could never also have fully understood really the depth of what it meant. I knew that I wasn't going to see my auntie that day, but I don't think that I fully processed that her existence, as far as we knew it in our everyday lives, was done. I would grow and have to struggle to remember what she looks like, and we would literally raise a child who would not know her mother, know who she was, the kind of things that she enjoyed, how excited she was about even the child that she was about to have. And all of those things I could never have put into perspective because I think they would have shattered my little heart. And now thinking about it in retrospect, that definitely was my first introduction to the world of death, if I can call it. And I have moved past that experience to experience, death in other ways. And, as you grow, you're in school and people are losing their parents. Someone has lost their sister. I remember, I think when I was in class 3, we lost one of our classmates, a boy in my class called Alex, died. And it was still confusing, like, how did he die? So we're never seeing him again. What's happened? Just like mystery. And there are not many conversations around death, especially to children. It's just that, okay, the person has gone to heaven and it ends there. So along the line, you have to start to build, some kind of muscle and understanding for the fact that life ends at some point and we go through death and experiencing the death of people that we love, people that we respect, sometimes as celebrities, people that she may not know personally but admire their body of work from afar. Sometimes it's personalities. As a country, we lost a president and it was odd, like very strange. Like, our president is dead. What do we do now? Where do we go from here? What does that mean for us? And I moved on, in early adult years, to a place where I felt like, oh, okay, at least, we've experienced enough loss, even if not directly, indirectly through other people's losses and us offering our sympathies and support to them. But you realize that when death hits you, it's very personal. It's very different. It's very direct. There's a completely different wave in processing it, in dealing with it, that you cannot compare to how you feel when you're empathizing with someone. I know that we all have the best of intentions when we try and offer support to somebody who has lost a loved one, and we say, I know how you feel and have my sympathies, and my heart breaks for you, and I'm so sad and I'm heartbroken, and all these, words of comfort that we do mean. But when you go through death yourself, you know that nothing comes close to the pain and the endless questioning of you, the one who has lost. And I experienced this more I can say when I suddenly lost my brother in 2017, he was not sick, um, very active. This is my older brother. He was married with 3 kids, was an ardent football lover, Arsenal supporter. Every Sunday, he's on a football field somewhere causing havoc, like very youthful personality. And I was in church when I randomly got a call. It was persisting. It was one of my cousins. He doesn't call often. So I thought, this must be serious. I step out and he's like, don't tell mommy. And I'm like, don't tell mommy what? He's like, about Yalbi, don't tell mommy, don't tell mommy. The family needs to gather here and make sure there are people around, and then we'll find a way to let her know what has happened. And immediately on those words, he indirectly told me that my brother had died. And the miscommunication here was that it had been put out and he had assumed that I had seen it. But because I was at church, I hadn't actually seen those messages. So I found out in a very rude way in terms of the time to process it and everything. And I immediately went hysterical, like, what do you mean? What's going on? And then, yeah, that was just like a spiral. But that kind of sudden death, outside of the pain and the heartbreak that it brings, was really, a learning curve for me, like a deep moment of learning where I saw how truly powerless we are in this game of life, in feeling like we're so in control. On the day that my brother died, it was a Sunday. He had ironed his clothes. His clothes were hanging in his house, that he's going to play football and come back and go to church with the family. His wife was actually upset that service starts at 9. How can you say you're leaving the house to go and play football and come back? He's like, oh, I'll come back. He's ironed his clothes and they're hanging. And she gives him, his space to go and play his football and at least come back and do what she wants to do. And he never came back. And when I went to their house that morning and saw his iron kaftan hanging on a hanger right there, I don't think there's a bigger statement of how fickle life is and how truly we're literally, I don't know what word to use, almost like puppets in the hands of the grand puppeteer. And that day, my brother was called, and whether he was ready or not ready, whether the family was ready or not ready, whether his children were ready or not ready, that was the end. We never saw him again and had to move on from such a painful, such a shocking experience. And in that same year, I found myself pregnant with a boy, a son, and immediately found comfort in the fact that I had lost one and gained another. And coincidentally, 3 of my siblings at the same time were all expecting when my brother passed. 3 of us were all pregnant in different stages of our pregnancies, but quite close. And we all gave birth to boys. We all had boys. We had 3 sons to replace our brother, and it was just a very humbling time for us as a family, and we took a lot of comforts from that. My brother himself had 3 sons, which we will always say that God took our brother from us, but at least he had 3 sons and we hold those boys so dear. But the added blessing was that those 3 pregnancies for my siblings all ended up being boys again. And yeah, we just found a way to, replace the tears with laughter and, live on. And really, that's what death teaches you, that you have to live. You have to find ways of moving on. You have to find ways of coming to terms with the passing. You have to keep the memory of this person that you loved and once had the benefits of having with you. And I always remember my dad for the strength that he gave us in that period, because there were things that my dad shared about my brother's passing that helped me navigate his own death later on when he passed away too. Because when my brother died, my father, everyone worried, like, how is my dad going to be? This is a man that we've never seen crumble. My dad is a man's, or was a man's man. Like, he's a pillar of our family. He's a strong man. He leads and everybody follows. He always knows what to do. He always knows what to say. He solves every problem. He's always okay. He never has a bad day. And now we're looking at this man losing his first son, someone that he was really close to. And we were still not processing the expectations of what that loss should do to a man like him. Because in our minds, like, why are you not crying? Why are you not like on the floor like us and feeling desolate and hopeless? And I don't doubt that his heart was broken. I don't doubt that he cried his own tears, but he continued to hold his head up high. And more importantly, he stood in for us as a family and constantly put us to the task of remembering our brother in the way that he meant to be remembered. His priority was that I actually remember in Sri, like the words that he said, which is almost like a proverb, which said that, and I paraphrase, but you should not go through an experience where someone can now look at you and point fingers and say, oh, look at this person. After this experience, see how they've ended up now. And basically, that counsel or advice that he gave us was to say that, yes, you're going through something difficult. Yes, you're going through something that's hard. But that must not be the narrative of your whole life moving forward. And we needed to honor the person that he was and, make sure that his sons know that their father was, a dedicated person. If he loved something, he loved hard and he was not letting go, that their father was a joker, that their father could tease the hell out of any situation, that their father was annoying to the bone and you can't get him to stop, and all these other great things, about him, and literally teaching us the way to do it. And in retrospect, like, I respect him so much for being able to do that for us, even though he was grieving himself. And a few years after, we didn't have that much of a bandwidth or a leash, I should say, because exactly 3 years after, then my father was diagnosed with cancer. And I specifically remember during my brother's funeral, when my father was, going up and down and, greeting people and thanking people. And, he actually rallied the family, and he loved music and he had a guitar and he was like a music guy as well. And on the day that we buried our brother, we moved from the cemetery and they said my father is calling everybody, like we all needed to come together at the house. And we're all confused, like, why? People are waiting, at the reception place, and you're meant to go, and they're like, it's an order. And like I said, my dad was a leader, like man's man. When he says something, it's final, so nobody questions it. So everyone moves, and this man just has us upstairs in our, living room, and he was sitting down, and they had chairs arranged, and he had his guitar, and he just started to play. And in the beginning, you were a little confused, like, people are waiting on us, right? But we sat and we were still in those moments. Nobody spoke. There was no conversation. It was calm. It was quiet. And he played 3 songs. Some people started to hum. Some people started to cry. Some people started to sing. And we sang for about, I'd say, a good 30 minutes. We sang and sang and sang. And at the end of his last song, he said to us that we were all we had as a family. It was devastating what had happened to us, but we were going to keep being the family that we are. And that was not going to take away from who we are. And all the things that, we had held dear will continue to be there. And honestly, that speech was so, like, I remember it's like yesterday. I sat there and looked at this man, like, what would we do without a man like this? Like, I was just in awe of him because of the peace that he was able to bring. I know most of the time when someone dies and it's so difficult, we say only God can give you comfort, only God can give you peace. But I will tell you that I got so much physical peace and comfort from my father and how he stood in for us. I don't know how he handled this in his quiet, but I think he did what he had to do, and it helped. It helped us so massively because we could have really been on the downside from that experience, but it changed our outlook, and we were really able to make something really positive out of that experience for ourselves, for our family, and especially for his children. And yeah, I just connect this to when my dad himself got his diagnosis of cancer, and it was horrible. And my heart was broken when I heard. So I get a call from my sister in London, which basically says that daddy has cancer. And he had been with her for a few weeks, they'd been running tests and so on. He wasn't actually sick. He just had, what sounded like a sore throat, very coarse voice, like someone who is recovering from a flu and has lost their voice. But obviously it went on for a prolonged time where now he had to check what was going on. And yeah, the minute I heard that word, I thought of death. Like, my father cannot die. He cannot have cancer. He cannot die. And immediately, that diagnosis alone for me was the beginning of his death, because in my mind, I'd already started to grieve. My heart was already broken. I was already sad and crippled with pain that, my father has cancer, that he has to suffer, that he was going to be unwell or further unwell. It was really difficult to see past that diagnosis, to think that, okay, yes, of course I know there are treatments, we didn't even know what stage, what extent, what doctors are saying, but that word in itself carried so much weight that I had already started to process death. Um, Over the course of the next couple of years, like another year into the second year, we also went through a phase of hope where basically he had to have his verse box taken out because he had cancer of the larynx. So there were surgeries, and all these things were heartbreaking on different levels, because knowing my father, the man that I knew and have always seen, to not even be able to have him speak was like him dying in one sense. The most charismatic man you would ever meet, so diplomatic in his way of speaking, in his delivery, in his approach. My father could meet anybody from Barack Obama to Shatawale and know exactly what to say to you, how to say it so that you feel like the two of you are BFFs. Like, that was my dad. Um, him without his voice, just, we couldn't fathom, like, it was pointless. A man who was full of wisdom, full of things to say, always talking. Like, how do you mobilize people? How do you lead a family? How do you command the authority without a voice? And that was the beginning of the end, really, for us. His voice was taken, and my father became a shell of himself. He was reduced to a little pad where he would scribble little things here and there when he desperately needed to communicate, because he had lost a part of himself where now he would only write what is absolutely necessary. So we would sit around him and conversations are being had, and I know that this man has a lot to say, but I think even the will to express yourself, your whole life to be reduced to a piece of paper can be, like, I can't imagine how difficult that must have been for him. So we would literally only see communication that was vital. And I still remember when he picks up his pad, do you know that is serious? And he always wrote in capital letters. So everything, everything sounded like he's shouting. And it was a very interesting time, very humbling also, because it really did show me that, like, life is just, not where we think of it. The control that we think we have. I was just thrown into, a space of deep thought and trying to process these feelings of watching somebody die slowly. And I think that was, or definitely is, my most difficult experience with death. I had always said in the past, because I think my biggest fear as a person naturally was to lose any of my parents, like to lose any of my parents. I remember in high school, that was one of the things that traumatized me the most. Like, if I don't hear from my mom one weekend, my heart is racing. If I get a phone call, I'm scared that they're saying somebody at home has died or my parents has died, because I think we had gone through the motions of seeing that happen for different people, and being away from your family, that becomes like your greatest scare. Um, so moving away, obviously growing up, not being confined to secondary school and all of that, I thought that would have left me. But when we were navigating this, deeply troubling thing with my dad, I realized that losing my parents was still the most terrifying thing for me. It was my biggest fear. And I always thought that sudden death is what would be scary, because, you're not expecting it. You just know that the person was there and then they say they're not. But nothing could have also prepared me for slow death. Slow death was torture. Slow death was painful. Every day I had to come to terms with different parts of death that I wasn't used to and didn't think people process. For example, when we had his second surgery and was recovering, he was okay. He was at home, like, he can walk, he can eat, but he's not himself, as you know. Eating even seemed transactional, like I'm eating because my body requires some food. He had no interest in what was on the plate. All those things, like, I didn't realize how they would break us in different ways. Even seeing my children at the time, actually, it was just Canaan. And I would go there to see my dad, and he would speak to him and my dad can't answer. And he's trying to find out from me why grandpa is not talking and can't talk, because he knows a very different side of him. And even how to explain this to a child when I myself feel like a child, confused as to how to process, these things. And just how that story progressed, never got any better, never got brighter. He got weaker and weaker till one day he died. And yeah, you would think that you're ready because you've had a long time, to process it and to know. So processing things like even how to communicate to someone who has been told that he's dying becomes a problem. You don't know if you should be positive and encourage them, because I feel like I may be letting him down because it is his end and there's nothing happy and joyful about that. I want to be able to motivate you in that space, but I'm not being fair to you because you are dying and nobody can change that fact. Even on a spiritual level, I didn't know, like, I was caught between fervent prayer and genuinely trusting God to heal my father, and being mentally prepared, like checking out and understanding that this is what it is, this is what has been said. I need to make my peace with it. I want to do things like I want to like try and do some things with him because I may not have him here much longer. And being even caught in that space of, faith against reality can be like a really difficult place. And I never thought I'd find myself in that place. And I never really made a decision as to what I was going to do, which meant that I did nothing because I was still trying to figure out whether to, be more present and keep praying with him and give him hope and encourage him, or take the other path. And before I could figure it out, he died. And at the time that he died, I was still like alone with my thoughts, where I'm like, Could I have done more in terms of his last days if we had known that it would happen that soon? Should I have been more present? Um, could I have prayed more? Could I have trusted more? Could we have done more to rehabilitate him after surgery even? And you blame yourself, you ask all these questions, and really and truly nobody knows. But moving out of that experience, like, it really did show me how different kinds of death do different things to you. I did share that I lost, someone that I was great friends with, someone who really empowered me and strengthened me in a way that was different from me in terms of male friendships. Because what I was used to was men take from you more than they give. Um, Relationships, like, if a friendship progresses into a relationship, then now it's romantic, so it's different. But I didn't really have much of an example of what somebody believing in you could look like, somebody sowing seeds of faith in you. Like, I still have days where I'm at a complete low, and I can remember I can hear his voice clearly saying, "You are like so incredible, you're so artistic." And he would always introduce me to somebody with like 5 different professions. And I'm like, "Why are you lying?" He says she's an artist, she's a designer, she's a speaker, she's a motivational artist. And I'm like, oh my God, like, cringe. It was always like cringe.